It's easy to record on this device. All right, so this is where we ended off yesterday. We have to show that they're inverses. So we're going to first figure out, I'm going to do a composition by putting my g function into f. So my f function has a square root. And that square root says take the square root of, and then I have x plus 4 over 5. And now inside of the parentheses, I'm going to put my g function. Wait, what happened? Well, I didn't do it with y'all. Y'all don't need me to do it with y'all? Yeah, y'all did it by yourselves. I know, look at y'all. You did it by yourselves. But I mean, it might be somebody who didn't do it, so I wanted to go over it. But if you were able to do it by yourself, then that's great. But that's what you were supposed to do. You're supposed to do it by yourself. All right, so let's go over it. Because, again, we have our quiz next week. And this class goes fast. So I want to make sure we're good. All right, so then we have the square root of. I'm going to simplify what I have in the numerator. So the 4's should cancel out first. And that should leave me with 5x squared over 5. What's the next thing that should cancel out? The 5. And the last thing would be the squares and the square root. And when you go the other direction, putting the f function into g, so that's 5, and then it's x squared minus 4. We're going to put that function into g. It's the opposite. So in this example, the first thing that's going to cancel out is your square. And then what's going to cancel out next? The 5's. And then the last thing to cancel out would be the 4's. Now this homework, 5.1 is due tomorrow. All right, any questions about C? So if you did that yesterday on your own, is that how you did it? All right, well, we doing good then. All right, let's go to D. Go ahead, take a minute, copy this down. And we're going to verify that they're inverses. Okay, so first we're going to put the g function into f. Let's see how y'all did. Hopefully you had a chance to do it. So f says 5x plus 3. Notice that we don't have a restriction. Now, why don't we have a restriction? It's no square. We only have to put that restriction, which you don't use, but that's only there for a quadratic. Okay, so that's just a little sidebar. So now I'm going to put this x minus 3 over 5 in, and we're going to simplify it. So there's only 2 steps that you would have to show. What would be the first step that you would show? Cancel out the 5's. So then that gives you x minus 3 plus 3. And then we're going to cancel out the 3's, and you'll have an x. G of f of x. So in my g function, I have x minus 3, so I'm going to put parentheses minus 3 over 5. And then in the parentheses, I have my f function. Now the first thing that's going to go away is the 3, because it's the opposite. So the first thing I'm going to cancel out are the 3's. And then that's going to leave me with 5x over 5, which is going to simplify down to x. Okay, so 5.2, verifying that they're inverses. How we feel about that? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, so now let's go back to example 1. So go ahead and glue down. That was the beginning part. I didn't want you to have to copy this down by hand. So this example, go ahead and copy this down. One-to-one function, this is the definition of a one-to-one. Go ahead and share your glue sticks. Mr. Shields, go ahead and glue that down. And then share your glue sticks with each other if you don't have one. And then it says, so the definition of one-to-one, because what you're going to have to do on the quiz next week is identify if they're one-to-one, is every y value has only one unique x value, and every x value has only one unique y value. What you might want to write also on that paper or somewhere near that paper, it's just there should be no repeats. So another way to think of that, if that definition is too wordy, it's just no repeats. So I want you to take a minute after you glue that down and just identify which ones are one-to-one. And then we can look at, you can do B, C, and D. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at X. So when I look at X, I have a 2, a 3, a -3, and a 7. Are any of those numbers the same? Any repeats in that? No? Okay. So now I'm going to switch colors. See, I know how to switch colors and everything in this program. And then we have 5, a 7, a 6, and a 4. Are any of those the same? No. So would this be one-to-one? Yes. So the answer is yes. All right, you go ahead and do the last 3. First you look at your X's, then you look at your Y's. It's that simple. Now, if you're checking X and you already can tell that it's not one-to-one, then we just stop there. We don't have to look at the Y. Because if you have a repeat in X or Y, it's an automatic no. You don't have to have a repeat in both. If you see a repeat in X or a repeat in Y, the answer is no. All right, what did you say for B, yes or no? No. So right here, does everyone see how you have a repeat right here? The 8s are repeated, so that's a no. All right, what about C? Who says yes? Who says no? All right, I agree. And why did you say no? What did you notice repeated? The 4. Anything else repeat? It could be more than one thing, but that was the first thing I noticed was the 4. So that's a no. All right, what about the last one? Yes or no? Who says yes? Who says no? I say no. I see the 2s. You see those 2s? Can't have a repeat. So that's a no. So the only yes we had was the first one. All right, so in the homework, you're going to have ordered pairs like this. You just have to tell me yes or no. All right, so the last thing for 5.2, because we're kind of doing it backwards, is finding the inverse. How to find the inverse. Now, you should remember this from Algebra 2, theoretically, if you had it like in real school. If not, go ahead and copy down these 4 steps, because this is something we cover in Algebra 2. Finding the inverse, we spend a lot of time on. So these are the steps of how you find the inverse. The first thing we usually do is take out the f of x and rewrite it with the y. And then you have to switch x and y and solve it for y. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Anybody remember having to do this? All right, so you don't have to write down the steps if you remember it, but I just have the steps here if you need that. So I'll give you a moment to copy that down. So these are just the steps on how to find the inverse. And then we're going to actually find the inverse. So instead of having two functions that we have to verify, now we have one, and we have to figure out what that inverse function would be. Okay, so this is our first example. We have this function, and we're going to find the inverse. So in order to find the inverse, the first thing I usually do, instead of using f of x, is write it with a y. So f of x and y are the same thing. So f of x equals y. So y equals 3x plus 5. That's first step. Step number 2 is to switch the x and y. So instead of y equals 3x plus 5, it's going to become x equals 3y plus 5. So now let's solve that equation for y. How would we solve this equation for y? What would be my first step? Because I need to get the y by itself. Subtract the 5. So let's subtract the 5. So then that'll be x minus 5 equals 3y. And then the last step would be to divide by 3. Divide everything by 3. So my inverse function, so I have x minus 5 over 3 equals y. And you know you can reverse this. So I'm going to rewrite it. So my f is on the left. So my inverse function would be, this is the symbol for inverse. This is not an exponent. This just means inverse. So f, the inverse function of f, is x minus 5 over 3. And that would be my inverse. So we're going to use these 4 steps and do it again. We're going to find the inverse. All right, let's go ahead and look at these two. So take a minute, copy down B and C. We're going to find the inverse. Okay, so first step, swap out the f of x with the y. So y equals the square root of x minus 4. Second step is replace or reverse or switch x and y, I should say. So instead of y equals the square root of x minus 4, it becomes x equals the square root of y minus 4. So we have to figure out how to solve for y. Anybody know what we would do first? Do I add the 4? Can I add the 4 first? No, we cannot do that. So what do we have to do first? We got to get rid of the square root. And how do we, what's the opposite of a square root? Square. So we're going to square both sides. So then that's going to give me an x squared on the left and then a y minus 4 on the right. Now we can add the 4. So we get x squared plus 4 equals y. We have y by itself. So my inverse function would be, gotta put the symbol for inverse, and this x squared plus 4. That is your inverse. That is the inverse of our original function. Let's go ahead and look at C. First step, we have y equals negative 16 plus x cubed. So now we're going to reverse the x and y. So x equals negative 16 plus y cubed. What would be the next step? To solve it for y. We got to get y by itself. Add the 16. So that's going to be x plus 16 equals y cubed. And the opposite of a cube is a cube root. So we have to take the cube root of both sides. So it's like, it looks like a square root, but you have to put that little 3 in there. That means cube root. So we have the cube root of x plus 16. That is my inverse. And you have to make sure that little 3 is there because we took a cube root, not a square root. So the quiz covers 5.1 through 5.3. Tomorrow we're going to start 5.3. And then I'll pass out the study guide on Friday. But before we do that, let's see. Hold on one second. Let me give you, go ahead and try to do, we got 3 more. Yeah. All right. So try to take a minute, copy down D and E. Go ahead and find the inverse. And remember, this is your domain restriction. We don't use that when we find the inverse. It just has to be there anytime it's a parabola. We have to include that. But when I'm finding the inverse, we don't do anything with that restriction. So take a minute. I want you to try to do D and E, and then we'll end there for today. And then their last step for this one would be to divide everything by -3. So there's 2 different ways that you could write your answer for full credit. The first way would be to just leave it as a fraction. So on the quiz next week, if you said the inverse function was just x minus 18 over -3, I would give you full credit for that. You could also separate it into 2 fractions and say -1/3 x plus 6. So that would be 2 different ways to write the inverse function. So instead of keeping it as 1 fraction, I would take the x and divide that by -3. So that would give me -1/3 x, and then -18 divided by -3 would be a positive 6. So either one of those would be full credit. Now let's look at E. So we have y equals -3x squared plus 5. Switch your x and y. Okay, so we have 3 steps. What would be the first step? Subtract the 5. And then after you do that, what would you do? Divide both sides by -3. So that would be x minus 5 over -3. And then you would take the square root. So your inverse function would be the square root of x minus 5 over negative 3. Or you could also say that you could also break that apart and say negative 1/3 x. I don't know if I can fit that. Hold on. Let me move this up a little bit. You could also say negative 1/3 x plus 5/3. So 2 different answers. They would both be counted as correct. So here or here. So we'll end there, and then tomorrow we'll do our last example for 5-2, and then we'll start 5-3.